So as Tricia said, this is a project we've been working on for many years since the finalization of the 2016 conservation strategy. So I'm going to give a presentation of how we got here and what the proposed changes are. And then we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions. The objectives of this presentation is to go over the proposed changes, initiation of the public comment period, and the timeline for the next steps of finalizing these revisions. So to refresh everyone's memories, the 2016 conservation strategy contained habitat standards. Those habitat standards were measurable criteria that were really a no net loss from 1998 habitat conditions. The logic behind that was to maintain or improve the habitat to reduce access-related disturbances and mortalities from human presence on the landscape. Those habitat standards applied on federal lands within the primary conservation area, also known as the recovery zone, which is the yellow outline on this map. 98% of the primary conservation area is managed by the Park Service and the Forest Service. So how did we get here? Initially, we developed habitat standards for the 2007, the first conservation strategy, and they were also appended to the recovery plan in 2007. In 2016, there were minor revisions to that just provide clarification to the standards. It did not make substantive changes. But during the rewrite of the conservation strategy leading up to 2016, it was recognized that there needed to be some flexibility for the land managers to responsibly manage for the increase in visitation. We did not have time to do that homework before the 2016 strategy was done. And so there is a placeholder in that version that says that the work would start with a technical team and be done by 2018. Here we are 3 years after 2018. However, like Tricia said, we wanted to be thorough and there was no rush on this, so all the partners agreed to extend that deadline. There's been a lot of successes and challenges with the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We've had a growing population in the GYE that led up to the 1998 baseline of 4 to 7% annual population growth. And then population growth started slowing in the early 2000s as a result of the population approaching carrying capacity. At the same time as that happened, we've had a great increase in visitor use. Again, 2021, record-breaking numbers for Yellowstone, and the season hasn't even ended yet. So there is identified a need for additional infrastructure to manage this use responsibly. And as you can see, as this hopefully the video is playing, that you can see the population of grizzly bears has not only grown in size, but it's also been growing in distribution over the past several decades. Management has improved greatly the conflict reduction at developed sites. You see in this picture a bear box with partners such as Greater Yellowstone Coalition and youth conservation groups. The land management agencies have managed to put bear boxes at the majority of campgrounds and continue to do that to reduce conflicts. So we've learned a lot about management, and it's been a multi-agency effort to decrease these mortalities, and it's been successful. The current habitat standards are really three-pronged. The 1998 baseline is to maintain the level of secure habitat. Those are areas that don't have roads or motorized routes. Limits the number of developed sites, so there's no increase in the number or capacity, overnight capacity at developed sites, and no increase in the number or size of livestock allotments. So secure habitat are areas that are at least 10 acres in size and more than 500 meters from an open or gated motorized route. So it's a motorized road or trail, a recurring low-level helicopter line. We have a few different types of developed sites that were in the 2016 strategy. We had visitor use sites that were both day use and overnight use. And then we also had administrative sites. So those sites that are used to support the management of the land management, any of the land management agencies and the visitation. Current developed site standards allows for changes of new or existing developed sites through mitigation. You have to close a site that is the same size or the same effect or influence before you create a new one or increase it. There are some exceptions with that to reduce resource damage, like putting in a pit toilet. It does not allow currently for increase in overnight visitor use or creation of new sites without mitigation. However, as many of you may know when you go out on the forest, in the current standard, we also have dispersed sites. They're not counted towards developed sites, but there's an allowance for elimination of dispersed sites to create and increase capacity at developed campgrounds. So these are the current 2016 habitat standards that the technical task team was tasked with reviewing and making recommendation to account for increased visitor use levels. This was evaluated in a cooperative manner, so it was a large technical team. The goal of these proposed revisions is to minimize the deviations from 1998 baseline and preserve these habitat gains that have supported this growing grizzly bear population, and establish constraints and measurable sideboards for which the land managers can accommodate visitor use without decreasing that positive growth of the grizzly bears. Also recognized in these potential revisions was the need to have public comment and approval by yes, and have a future tracking and reporting of these. So the revision process was a two-step process to improve the mapping. First off was correcting errors. And I cannot thank Lisa Landenberger enough for this. She has retired since this effort began, but she was the GIS wizard behind driving all of this. And she made sure she had this to a complete point before she retired. So as GIS has improved, many errors were identified from the 1998 baseline that were corrected for. But the big change is the replacement of developed area points where appropriate with footprints. Previously, all developed sites from a trailhead to a building at Grant Village or the Mammoth Hotel were a single point on a map. This new method defines areas of concentrated human use associated with existing developed sites. The advantage of the footprint approach is that it more accurately represents the human presence on the landscape. These represent areas that are already being managed for exclusion of bears. You don't want bears walking between your buildings in Mammoth. It also defines a space for expansion and imposes measurable sideboards for that management increase. This footprint approach applies to major developments such as Mammoth, Grant Village. It also applies to front country administrative sites, developed campgrounds, and visitor overnight lodges. It does not apply to those smaller sites such as trailheads and picnic areas that we are maintaining as point sites. So these proposed revisions allow some flexibility within that footprint. For overnight capacity, the proposal is to increase overnight capacity at no more than 10% for visitor use at both Forest Service and National Park Service lodges. The Park Service, in addition, also have a master plans with capacity that may be below that 10%. So they would not increase above that master plan. In addition, this will allow for an increase in overnight capacity within existing footprints at Forest Service campgrounds. This is an example of the Old Faithful major development. So as you can see, it encompasses all of the visitor overnight sites, the visitor day use sites, and all the administrative sites that are associated with Old Faithful. And we've provided some opportunities then between existing administrative sites and existing day use sites. Within that footprint, there are some spaces that could allow then for an increase in a restroom or other day use sites or expansion of one of those lodges up to 10%. This is a Forest Service example of a campground. As you can see, there's a buffer, a footprint of a convex hole around the campground. And that's already an area that you don't want grizzly bears to be in. You don't want grizzly bears walking between campsites. So if you provide a convex hole around the whole campground, you provide the opportunity to create a new loop and new campsites, as you see in the green circles, within that footprint without actually decreasing secure core from grizzly bears. So now I'm going to switch to revisions in day use sites. Day use sites will also be allowed to increase within the footprints that already exist. In addition, there'll be an allowance to increase the number of day use sites along primary road corridors as shown in this map. Those are the red roads have been identified as primary road corridors. Those could be allowed within 300 meters of the existing primary roads. It has to avoid high quality habitat, which would be riparian areas, wetlands, white bark pine stands, and not adjacent to cutthroat trust falling streams. There's a cap that it would affect no more than 10% of the existing primary road corridor. Public transportation and associated utility infrastructure would be the only commercial facilities allowed. The idea is not to increase commercial items here. And then also, of course, best management practices would be put into place, such as bear resistant garbage cans if you have a picnic area or a rest stop. This would allow for new pull-offs, rest stops, picnic areas. And as you can see, this is a great example from Yellowstone that it is really needed for traffic management, visitor safety and accommodation, and natural resource protection as people have started parking off roadways. This is an example of what that would look like. This is the footprint around Old Faithful again. The light gray around Old Faithful is the 500-meter buffer that would be non-secure. And then you have the 500-meter buffer around the road corridor, which is also already defined as non-secure. So you could have a new parking lot within 300 meters of the roadway in this primary road corridors under this proposal. Now, the third type of revision is for the administrative use. That will also allow expansion and modification within the existing footprint. We also tweaked a little bit of the emergency use. It's been recognized that such things as changes in hot springs or thermal features sometimes requires emergency repairs and replacements or realignments that are really not a change to the baseline and should not need approval. So with these changes, the secure habitat definition is tweaked slightly. It's still more than 10 acres in size and more than 500 meters from a motorized route and recurring low-level helicopter line, but in addition, you're buffering a prescribed footprint. Previously, there was no buffer around developed sites at all in calculating secure core. So this new method does result in slightly lower percentages of secure core, but does not translate to a loss of habitat on the ground. It's just more accurate in measuring the human presence on the landscape. And I know this is small, so I don't expect you to read it. This is in Appendix E, but what I wanted to really point out is this is, for each subunit, you have the 1998 baseline as has been previously reported, and then how that is affected by applying this footprint approach and what percentage change in secure core that means. And if you look at just the total in the primary conservation area, this new approach is only a 0.2% decrease in secure core. And reminder, that is just in the reporting level of secure core. That is not an actual change on the ground. It's just a change in this new measurement method that more accurately reflects where bears already are not occurring. So in summary, the technical team reviewed the 2016 habitat standards and made these recommendations to replace the points with the footprints to be more accurate in representing human presence and management intent. It imposes measurable sideboards, so measurable areas where development can occur without further decreasing secure core for grizzly bears in the PCA. I do want to acknowledge the technical team. They have been meeting. I was a member of the technical team along with all land management agencies. They met endless times to work through the technical side of how to develop footprints, and then actually implementing it and getting recommendations to the land managers. So finally, the next steps. So the draft revisions for Chapter 3 and the Appendix E are available at IGBConline.org if you have not already seen them. As per the strategy, these will be available for public comment. The public comments will be accepted until December 31st. And there is an email address here. That email address will also be on IGBC Online for you to click on. It will take you to submit it. Please include yes grizzly bear in the subject line so that the Forest Service can discern the public comments meant for this topic from other topics that they're receiving public comments on. Once the public comment process is finished, the technical team and the managers will process and evaluate public comments over the winter. And the goal is to finalize the revisions to the Conservation Strategy Chapter 3 at the spring meeting.